Hey guys, welcome to the Kane audio vlog. It's Friday. It's time for another Ask Me Anything. Usual rules apply. Comment anything you want below this video and I'll get back to you in next week's video answering the comments. Before I get on to last week's video, house admin, is there anything I wanted to mention? I'm sure there was and I can't remember what it was. Yes. So I've now... for those of you that follow me on Instagram and whatnot, I've now got, I think, enough cameras and SD cards and crap, whatever. You don't need to know all the details. I am still needing a couple more bits. I need another tripod and another microphone, I think, because I like this Rode Video Mic Pro that's picking me up now. But I feel the Video Pro Plus is the way to go, and I need another because I'm going to have two people, two angles, two microphones. So there we go. But the point being is I'm getting there. I'm getting close to being able to do the podcast. So I'll probably run it with a couple of pilot episodes first because I don't know if you guys know this, but I'm not a filmmaker. So I don't know how the format is going to look. I don't know... I'm okay with the basics of whatever, but I feel like I'm gonna need to make edits, and I think to keep it running smoothly I'll need B-roll footage, so I'm gonna have to practice a whole bunch to get these looking good. So there we go, that's the update on that. The other update is so I have put together, again, if you follow me on Instagram, Facebook group, maybe somewhere else, you'll probably already know this. I have put together a Spotify playlist called Kane and Friends. And yeah, I kind of figured that I need to listen to more music anyway. And I've been working on a few projects recently that meant listening to some really good music, and I kind of added them to a bit of a playlist and thought, you know what, this needs to be public and this needs to be a thing. So yeah, that's exactly what I've done. Basically, I've made a public Spotify playlist and I will try and curate it as best as I can. I have put out a Facebook post on the Facebook group and my Facebook page, and I have said to people, if you've got suggestions for music that you think should be added to this playlist, by all means drop a comment with the Spotify link and whatever. I think what I'm gonna do, so if you want the link, in fact that's the other thing, if you want the link to go to the playlist, I have then, because the link was super long, I've made a shorter link which is spotify.domkane.com. Easy to remember, and that'll just take you to the Spotify playlist. However, I think I might make a page for that subdomain so that maybe we can have submissions and then make it like a almost publicly curated list. Let me know your thoughts on that in the comment below this, and we'll work on it together, basically. And that is house admin. I'll drop a link below this video for that. I think that's all the house admin for this week. So yeah, it's all a bit rushed because again I've got loads to do, but I love these things, so let's crack on. Right, last week's video, starting at the top. Casey Music: hey Dom, thanks for your answer. Actually signed a whole EP to that label, which is great. That is great, well done, congratulations to you, and let us know when it's out. In fact, because I recognise you're a regular viewer on this channel, I will say when it comes out, drop a link to it on the YouTube video for that week and I'll read it out the next week. To anyone else watching this, if you're not a frequent commenter or whatever and you're not regularly involved in these videos, then tough shit, I'm not going to read yours out. So my question is, would you recommend getting a professional mixdown for your track before sending it out to labels? Or would you wait for investing the money until a label actually picks the tracks up? Have a great week. You too, Polar. High five. Yeah, that's a good question. It's kind of, there isn't a right or wrong answer. It's one of those ones, I think. So for me personally, I guess it depends on where you're at as a producer, but if you're at the point of signing tracks, then you should be at the point where you've done good quality productions. So if you think that maybe your mixes are a weak spot within your productions, or you think a good, a professional mixdown could at least just make it a bit stronger, then I would say always just go for that professional mixdown if you can afford it, if you can do whatever. As for waiting for investing the money until a label actually picks the tracks up, that's also a tricky one. I mean, nobody wants to be wasting money. But the other thing to remember is, if you've sent tracks to a label and they pick it up and they want to sign it, then clearly they didn't think you needed a mixdown. So I guess that's the thing to remember. Doesn't mean you don't need one, or doesn't mean that a mixdown wouldn't improve it. But if the label didn't think you needed one, then that's your call. The other thing to remember is, I would say, similarly, interestingly, tying in with what we were talking about last week with how much money you make from releasing an EP, even on a big label. It's very rare that a release on a smaller label these days would cover the costs of a mixdown. So I guess there's that to bear in mind. But I guess, if you've got a good day job and whatever, and you earn fairly good money, it doesn't need to be great money, then a professional mixdown is not crazy money. It's not, they're not the most expensive things in the world. So it should be, something to consider, I would say. So I guess the answer is, it's not essential. And if the label's already picking it up, then you probably don't need it. So personally, if I was going to get my tracks professionally mixed down, I would do it before sending any demos to a label. And I think that's an interesting point for these days. It used to be that you would send a rough draft demo idea to a record label and they would see the potential in that. These days, 99% of A&Rs, especially in the bigger labels, cannot see beyond a demo or a draft. They need to hear the finished, polished, ready to go product. Otherwise, I don't know, they just can't see beyond a demo. So I would bear that in mind. Never, in this day and age, never send a rough and ready demo to a label. I would always send 100% finished, mastered, ready for release. Bainbridge. Hi Dom, Polar, high five. Much appreciate the opportunity to raise a mixing question with you. I'm fairly comfortable mixing most instruments, finding space for them within the mix. However, my Achilles heel seems to be pianos. I really struggle to make them prominent in the mix without muddying the overall content. Appreciate this is probably a context specific, but I wondered if you had any specific techniques you use that could help. Yeah, I agree. Pianos are a tricky one, and now I have to make some assumptions here. My first assumption is that you're dealing with electronic music, probably 4/4 big kick drum stuff, with bass lines and whatnot. If that's the case, then I would usually recommend high pass filtering piano, probably more than you think it should. You need to be subtle with it. Obviously, we don't just want a tinny piano sound, but you do need to really pull away some of the low end of a piano. I would say probably anything from around 300 hertz down is really the muddy area that is conflicting with the rest of your track. So I would say firstly that. I would also say try putting some reverb on it, but high pass the input of the reverb. So find a reverb with, I know Ableton has it on the built-in reverb, as does Bitwig, I think. Not sure on any others, but if not, Okay, let's pretend you're not on either of those. If you, instead of chucking the reverb on the piano channel, chuck it on a send channel, but before the reverb, stick in a high pass filter, say 1K-ish, and then feed that into 100% wet reverb and bring the level of that send channel right down and feed the piano into that send channel. So all you're basically doing, the aim of this is you're just adding a really soft touch of reverb, but only to the very high end, the high frequencies of the piano, just to give it that slightly more extended sound without the body and the underbody of the piano coming through. Without that being extended, you're just extending the high end and the presence. So that's something to try. I would also then finally suggest something like a transient designer. I have used them on pianos before, and just pop up the attack times and bring down the sustain levels of the piano a little bit. That mixed with a very subtle high pass filter is probably the answer you're looking for. But again, as you say, context specific, but in general, that's what I'd be looking at. Unknown artist. Hi Dom, been checking in regularly but hanging in the background. This week's AMA was amazing. Really helpful to hear about the finances and real business bits. You're welcome. Keep up the great work as usual. Polar, high five. Then we've got a bunch of high fives coming up. BWO official, Polar Dom, high five. Rod Marconi, Polar, high five. Yanis Lukmelis, Polar, high five. St. Nicholas, Polar, high five. Zombo, production related question to fill background space. And I think this is the last question, so it's a bit of a short one this week, she said. Production related question, how to fill background space, really struggle here. And how did you do the intro for your track Borg? Good question. I can't remember the intro to Borg. Let's have a look. Borg. Ooh, I don't even come up. Dom Kane. I probably got it somewhere on, well, I'd hope I've got it somewhere on my computer. Okay. Ah, there we go. Right. Can I play this without getting a copyright notice? Okay, so that... in fact, one thing I will mention is I did a tutorial session for Sonic Academy on Borg. Was it Sonic Academy? No, it wasn't. It was Fader Pro. So it is out there, but let's have a look. So the intro. So I'm using that arpeggiator. Several arpeggiators. Do you know what? The intro to that is kind of unimpressive in that there's nothing special going on in there that I can hear. As for finding space, interestingly, similar to the question from Ben Bainbridge with the piano, I'd say similar answer to that, I guess. So I used an arpeggiator that was kind of off kilter, off rhythm, and not just a 4/4 or just 16th note. In fact, on Borg, I think the time signature for that is 5/infinity, because, or 5/1, I suppose. Yeah, that would be the time signature. It would be 5/1. Either way, it's 5 beats long, the phrase, this arpeggiator, so it never really is fully in sync. Every 5 16-bar rotations, it eventually repeats itself, but it's never really in sync, and that forces perspective. And the reason I did that was because it forces perspective of rhythm out during the breakdown. So when the melodies and everything are building up, you're never quite sure where beat 1 is, and it's kind of throws the brain off a bit. or it did for me anyway. So that's something about, I think, is a good way to bring in some sort of something just a bit more creative and a bit different into your intro. So I used that 5/1 time signature arpeggiator, but I definitely will have drenched it in reverb and brought it way down in the mix, and then slowly evolve another arpeggiator that works as almost a counter melody to the first arpeggiator, which is why I enjoy using arpeggiators. I'm calling them arpeggiators. I suppose they're ostinatos, really. I kind of think of an arpeggiator as a repetitive 16th note thing, whereas an ostinato is more of it's got its own rhythm and it's repetitive and repeating throughout. And so I guess if you have an ostinato with a counter ostinato underneath it or on top of it in perhaps a different octave, certainly playing different notes and potentially a different rhythm, and having those two arpeggiators, and then if you put one of those I'm calling them arpeggiators again, if you have one of those ostinatos in a 5/1 time signature and the other ostinato is in a 4/4 time signature or a 4/1 time signature, then they're never quite meeting each other properly. And I think that's probably where the Borg intro becomes different to most, certainly if we're talking dance music. Yeah, that is 5/1. Yeah, and then I start bringing in a few more beeps and bits. Yeah, who knew my music had that much detail? I didn't. So yeah, that's probably the best way of sort of filling background space. The other trick I would say is you cannot beat, and I genuinely mean this, there's something about extended single note tones. Just if your track is in C sharp, just hold a C sharp note in a upper middle octave on, it can be a string, it can be anything, and give it some side chain. If it's 4/4 electronic music, then give it some side chain, give it that sort of pumping feel, and bring it really low down in the mix, really low down. I have been working on a track very recently, in fact I think it might have been yesterday even. Let's have a look. I guess I can kind of play a piece of this, if I can remember where I put it. Over there, unfinished, and let's have a very quiet listen, because some of these are album so I can't really play them too loud, but there is one here somewhere. No. Here we go. Is it this? So ignoring those chords, in the background, so I won't play any more than that, but that's just an extended note. It's done on the Moog, and I set two oscillators to be fractions off frequency from each other, and what happens is they start phasing between each other, and it's almost like the two oscillators are just fighting each other to the death. Drench that in like 100% wet reverb with a delay of, say, a reverb tail of, say, 3, 4, 5 seconds. So it's really wet, drenched reverb, and it's just that note just gently oscillating in the background. Like I say, 100% wet on the reverb, and then bring it way down in the mix, then throw some sidechain on it, and it's really subtle in the background. I would say that is the ultimate way to sort of fill space between kick drums, percussion, whatever it is you want to, whatever you're about to introduce or whatever. Yeah, that's probably the best tip I could give. I can see there's a response here. Unknown artist, Sup Zombo, I fucking love Borg. High five to you then. One of my favourites of Dom's work. In regards to filling space, I love using reverbs, there we go, possibly making your synth sounds a little more wet. However, I think you have to be careful not to overdo it, definitely. Which is why I sort of say 100% wet, but way down in the mix, and do it as a separate synth. This is, yeah, so if your main synths, you know, just have a little touch of wet reverb to them to fill a bit of space, but they should really be in a very set, structured position, whereas something like a droning single note, 2 oscillator, extended note throughout the entire track, you can automate the volume up and down, maybe 2 dB, 3 dB throughout the entire track, just up and down, let it oscillate. Maybe stick in a high pass filter and just up and down, you know, a tiny amount, just over a period of 16, 32, 64 bars, just let it flow freely, so it's sort of this infinite sound, so that if somebody does tune into that sound, which we don't tend to as humans, if you're listening to a track, we don't tend to just go, oh, I'll listen to this one note at the top in the background. But if somebody does tune into it, they'll hopefully maybe notice that it's kind of changing throughout the track, and it's not just one held note, because that would be boring, and that's not what we want. So that, my friends, is it for this week. Thank you very much for listening, watching, whatever. Please do get involved. Drop me anything you want below this video, and I'll get back to you in next week's video. And I would say let's have a keyword being paper. So if you've made it this far in, comment the word paper and you'll get a high five next week. I'll see you next week. Cheers.